Well, hi there, it's me, Penny. Welcome back to my practice room for this tutorial devoted to J.S. Bach's Invention Number 2 in C minor. This is BWV 773, and it's a canon. Ooh, all the juicier, right? I did a video recently where I talked about the structure of this canon along with some other non-pianistic things that excite me about the music. So there's a card up here in your screen. You can check that out if you like. But this video is about practicing. I'm going to share some of the things that I do when I practice it, some of the things I'm listening for and trying to avoid. So get your sheet music out. I've included a link in the description, and let's get started. First off, the piece begins with a rest on the downbeat. And we see this sometimes in Bach. I'm thinking of the English Suite Number 2. A piece that begins with a rest on the downbeat. And these are critical moments. It may seem like you just scored a freebie, right? Woo, that's one less note I gotta play, right? But you actually have to work twice as hard, because when we have rests in music, especially on a downbeat, particularly at the beginning of the piece, we have to ensure that they have the same energy and awareness of their placement in the strongest part of the beat, as if they were an actual note. And how do we do that, right? It's a very abstract concept to imagine silence as having stress to it. And what comes in handy here, of course, is use of your breath, singing. Of course, we pianists are notorious sniffers, right? That can be very helpful. You want to try to limit it so it doesn't get too noisy in your performing, perhaps. But whatever you do, you got to energize those rests. Because if we don't, we can get something like this. As opposed to I felt the downbeat. The rest that's on the downbeat. I felt that in my body. So it's like you're, and I do not like going to water parks, but this is the analogy that comes to mind. Like you're going down a water slide or something, and once you leave the starting gate at the top, there's no turning back, right? Unless your swim trunks get stuck or something. You're going for the ride. The next stop is pool when you hit bottom. So you try to feel like the rest on the downbeat is like there's energy, like you're going down the slide. There's no stopping. It doesn't mean we're rushing, but it just means that you're just feeling the rest and as if you were a singer, and all the notes that follow are like paper clips to that magnet that is the rest on the downbeat. In that excerpt I just played a moment ago, the bad demonstration, you noticed I accented the B natural. That note, I gave you this. This is something I hear a lot with students, and it's a temptation in this piece if we're not careful, especially because this piece is very scalar-like, right? It's in C minor, and that's a good point, actually, in terms of in terms of fingering, how to prepare good fingering for the piece. You can just practice the C minor scale. Right? So this piece is very scalar-like, lots of scalar moments. Right? So you can get that C minor scale in your hands by practicing it to warm up. But you know that interspersed with the scalar passages in this piece are wide intervals. There or there. This is in measure 1 and 2. Right there in the middle of the first bar. Throughout the piece, a lot of wide intervals interspersed with the C minor scalar bits. And of course we go into G minor land elsewhere in the piece. But the problem with all of those wide intervals interspersed in the scalar material is that we can get bumps, even if we are breathing and feeling our strong beats. So we can get something like this if we're not careful. Let me elaborate on that poor demonstration. Right? Oh, it's terrible. The hands are also not together, but you could hopefully hear a lot of those notes that fall on a weak part of the beat were getting accented, and that's what we got to be careful of. We have to, and that opening rest on the downbeat sets the ball in motion, and so counting out loud is another thing you can do. Remember, this piece is in 4/4 time, common time, so 4 beats per bar. Each of those quarter notes we could subdivide, of course, into 4 16th notes. And the strongest beat is the first beat. The next strongest beat is the third beat. Beats 2 and 4 are the weak beats. And as we said, we got to rest on the downbeat. But even within those 4 16th notes per beat, there are still strong and weak moments. So the first note of any beat, the first of those 16th notes of any of these beats, is stronger than, say, the 4th 16th of the beat, or the 2nd 16th of the beat, even the 3rd 16th note of the beat, I think. But certainly the front of the beats are the strongest, the fronts of the first and third beats the most strong. So you got to keep that in mind, because, as I say, those points combined with the fact that we got these wide intervals scattered around the scalar material of C minor are cause for unwanted bumps. Let me do it again here, just with one hand. I'll do the left hand. I'm having random notes clunking along. It's like an old jalopy, right? So if you do some counting out loud, this kind of thing, you could even really subdivide your counting. Count the 16ths. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a this kind of thing. And also, when you get comfortable with that subdividing of the counting, then get rid of all the E andas, get rid of those, and just count either 1 and 2 and, so you're counting the 8th notes. That would be like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. And make sure it's reliable. If you're having a hard time maintaining a reliable tempo, then slow down. And if it's got an itchy nose, excuse me, if it's still giving you grief, then get your metronome out and take a slow tempo and work your way up from there. I have my metronome on the shelf here, and I should also point out that this is the first video where you are able to see my my little crocheted Bach. This was a gift from a student. So if she is watching, again, thank you very much for thinking of me. It's a very charming little gift, and I love it. Mr. B is very happy in the practice room. All right? Okay, so counting out loud. This is very essential. You can also practice accenting the front of each beat. It won't sound the most attractive, but it'll help to get your rocks off the road. Get the paving crew out, right? Left hand. 1. I'm just doing one hand here, and that's a good way to start. Hands separately, of course, is always the best entry point into a new piece, but counting hands together as well. So that should help eliminate some of the awkward lumps and bumps along the road. The other thing, too, especially because this piece begins with a rest on the downbeat, and every time we get that statement of this theme, pretty much, well, actually sometimes not, but certainly in the beginning, it's best you'll get more control over your sound when you approach from above the key. I talked about this in the tutorial for the D minor invention, that's number 4, which does not have a rest on the downbeat. I talked a fair bit about approaching that note from above, that first note. This kind of thing to help get a nice push off of that first note. But we don't have a note on the downbeat to push off of here. So combined with the feeling the beat, the singing, the counting out loud, sniffing, all these things, accenting the beat, you remove the accents on the beat when you actually go to perform it. Let's be clear. Some of these practice techniques are not to be used when actually performing the piece. Accenting the beats is one of them. But that same tip from the D minor invention applies here. Just a little toss of the hand to approach from above, because it'll help give you good traction, good point of initiation to the phrase. There's an analogy that came to my mind recently in conjunction with this passage, and it's dribbling a basketball. I used to play on the high school basketball team, and we would have to do extended bouts of dribbling, just standing still or running and dribbling, but keeping your head up, not looking at your hand. It's kind of like piano, actually. And trying to get reliable toss of the hand and consistency of the bounce. So that toss of the hand is a little bit like what we're going for here. And having that same point of beat reliability as with like when you're bouncing the basketball, you don't want to have some bounces, this high, and then another bounce way low, and then another one way too high. You're trying to get consistency to get it around the same point. Same thing here. So you can just take like the equivalent of one dribble of your basketball and just do it on the keyboard. And I'm trying to avoid this. It's like popping the balloon before we give it to our friend for their birthday gift, So just keeping air in your balloon, keeping a good consistent dribble of your piano basketball here. And those things apply to the whole piece, of course. And another challenge of this piece is the trill. We've got trills in both hands, no less. And because it's a canon, nothing is really letting up in terms of, this hand has just like some simple accompaniment while this hand has the theme. Both hands have the theme. There's 2 bars there in 9 and 10 where the right hand has a kind of free material, and similarly later towards the end of the piece, 19 and 20, the left hand has some free material. But the rest is all literal imitation. The right hand begins the canon in measure 1, and then 2 bars later, the left hand comes in. Just like when you were singing in kindergarten, 3 blind mice singing in a round, that's called a canon. And that's what this piece is. It's the only canon, as far as I know, in the inventions. And I've, as a side tangent, because I've been practicing this piece, I'm not terribly happy with the last recording I did of it, and I'm trying to figure out a better way to listen, or to figure out how to listen when playing a canon. Because let's face it, Bach wrote more fugues than canons, at least that I've encountered. There are canons in Art of Fugue, and the Goldberg variations have a few, but mostly it's fugues and imitative texture. So I haven't encountered nearly as many canons as I have fugues, and I'm trying to figure out how to listen. And one thing I was trying, and I might do it in a performance, I think I might, we'll see, is to try a different articulation in each hand. Because both hands, as I say, have the same thematic material, just 2 bars ahead of, one hand is 2 bars ahead of the other at all times. So I want to hear ultra clarity. And in order to do that, I found I had to try something new. Maybe a staccato in one hand and a legato in the other hand. So I've been playing around with that. But that's my issue right now. These trills, though, they are an issue for all of us. And keep in mind, like we said before, the front of the beat is, regardless of which beat in the bar it is, the front of the beat, or the first note of your trill, in this case, I'm in measure 3, right hand, is more energized. It's a little bit stronger. To put it bluntly, it's a little more accented than the rest of that beat. So you want to hear a clear ta-dum. If I do it without the trill in measure 3, G, G, F. So you're hearing the G a little stronger and the F a little less, because the G is on the front of the beat and not the other way around, which would sound like this. They get those rocks in the road again. Again, you can do your dribbling. Practice the 2 notes 10 times in a row like you would a basketball. And then add your trill. Still feeling the little accent, little emphasis on the front of the beat. Maybe you can hear me sniffing. And I'm trying to get lightness and clarity in all those trills. I've had a lot of problems trying to get clarity in these trills, especially the left-hand ones. Like, where was the one? There it is. That's the one in measure 8 of the left hand. The end of measure 8. Because I'm coming out in the 3rd beat of that bar. My fingering is 5, 3, 1, 5. And then I'm trilling on the note above the D, so the E flat. And I'm trilling 2 rotations with 3, 1, 3, 1. Now to do those 2 things as isolated events, that's fine. It's a little tricky, but there it is. That's pretty reliable. But when I have to get my needle and thread out and stitch it so that it comes after, then just things go awry. And I tried changing my fingering, but which brings me to another issue. When you're trilling on when your trill starts on a black note, as this one does, it starts on E flat. I think it's good to avoid using your thumb. I have seen professionals trill, start a trill on a black key with their thumb, and I cringe. I watch it, and it's just, because the thumb is a short finger, and it's on the side of the hand. The black keys are short, they're narrow, they're elevated, and it's just so risky to me. So 3, which is my starting trill finger, 3 is a nice long finger, and I feel like it's a good idea to avoid your thumb, short finger, on a black note trill, if possible. Maybe if you're trilling between two black notes, that's something else. That's a little different. But trilling from a black to a white, ooh, instead of 1-3-1-3 or 1-2-1-2, I like 3-1-3-1. But that means I got to do a really quick shift over of my hand from the third beat. This is where slow practice is absolutely critical. And in both of those cases, I'm feeling my little bit of stress, not a hardcore accent, but just a little bit of emphasis on the first note of each beat. So the A flat in beat 3, and then the first note of my trill, which is an E flat on the front of beat 4. And that's a kind of a crossover that you have to make. And it needs to happen swiftly. One of the things about playing the piano that can be deceiving is that if we're playing at a slower tempo, we feel like our movements can be also slow. But as Leschetizky said, and he passed it on to his students, and my teacher, who had some training from a Leschetizky pupil as well, and knew plenty of Leschetizky pupils, she said it too. You got to prepare the hand quickly. You can be playing a slow tempo, but you got to prepare the hand because it takes time to get the appropriate portion of the finger on the appropriate part of the key, as well to align your arm to whatever kind of release or shifting or rotating that needs to happen. It takes time to do these things. So that was just something that stood out to me. I think I've got a couple other, while we're talking about fingering, and there's like the longer trills there that we have in measure 2 in the right hand, and then measure 4 in the left hand. I think those are a little more straightforward. I've done some videos about trills. Maybe that will be helpful as well. But I wanted to throw out a few just sort of general fingering related tips here, and that is to avoid repetitious fingering. For instance, measure 3 of your left hand. I have seen professionals use 1-2-1-2 up the wazoo, as though they didn't have 3 other fingers. And it just, again, it makes me cringe. In measure 3, 1-2-1-2-1-5-2-1-2-5, 1-2-1-2. It's basically just this inky dinky spider, right? This is, to me, based on the training I've had and the studies I've done after my doctoral studies. I read a lot of books by great pianists, Joseph Levine and the pupils of Theodore Leschetizky, Abram Chasins, and all sorts of players. And Rosalind Turek, her especially, and she said, I think it was her very words, frequent changes of fingering is essential. Are essentials. Frequent changes of fingering are essential in Bach. Absolutely. You gotta use the whole hand and try to limit the amount of thumb. If you can avoid the thumb and play a note with a longer, stronger finger, then by all means do so. Especially in a notey piece like this, because we get those thumb bumps, as I was saying earlier. And another thing you want to watch out for with fingering would be when you play, for instance, the left-hand part in measure 14, where we have, in that little bit, there's a tied note, right? E flat is tied over. We don't want to cheat. This is the danger when it comes to clear part playing in Bach. Clear distinguishing of the parts, the hands in this case. And when we come off a note early, sometimes it's absolutely unavoidable if it's thick 4-part texture in Art of Fugue and you got a triple fugue and it wasn't written for a 88 keyed 700-pound grand piano from the late 19th century. Well, then you may need to cheat and lift a note early here and there. But 9 times out of 10, if you just change a fingering or get a little bit more disciplined, you can manage to hold notes for their full value. And in this case, I've seen it done. Professionals will let go of that E flat because they've played it with I've seen it played with a finger 5. So 2, 5. And then they play the next note with finger 5. So they've used finger 5 twice in a row, which that in itself makes me cringe. Because there was no significant leap in between, and on top of that there's the tied note, which gives us a hole in the music, and we're cheating. We're letting go of that tied note. We're doing this. Like there's a lift in between. You want to avoid that. I use 1, 3, and then 5 is already situated above the next note. Instead of, maybe you want the effect of the hole there, or a little breath, perhaps you want to call it. But then you got to shape what comes after so that it reflects that. Much of the time, some of these decisions are not necessarily interpretative decisions made with a lot of passionate, conviction, but rather just lazy fingers that couldn't care less. It's good enough. But go beyond it's good enough, because there's good stuff there waiting to be had. Good enough is never enough. We need more, and we can do better. Glenn Gould was always talking about, and I don't remember which source it was, whether it was one of his TV programs or some of his writings, but I remember hearing him say how he felt that we're all capable of listening and hearing so much more deeply than we realize. And it's listening, we're so saturated with visual stimuli, we kind of don't know how to listen, to really listen. And that's why it's good when you're listening to recordings or at concerts even, although it can be uncomfortable, but just like close your eyes even, so it's just the sound. I think it was Abram Chasins who would say, some audience members choose to listen with their eyes. And that's a problem. But careful listening there, and no cheating. And another thing you want to watch out for in terms of fingering would be if you need to play a long note, which in this case, say, would be a quarter note. If you got to play that with finger 5, for instance, like measure 20, the last note of measure 20, left-hand part, that A natural there with the tie on it. And again, you don't want to cheat there. But I've seen it done where the player is using their 5th finger, and again, I think it's laziness, but they play with the side of their hand, like when we used to do martial arts, and there were like the different hand punches, the open hand, and you had to like hit with this part. Instead of going like this, or even just a little bit of that is careless. Keep a curved finger and use more of the pad. In fact, that spot at measure 21, that I'm citing that because I've seen it done. Finger 5 used on that A natural. There, I would prefer to do a substitution. So I play it with 5, but then I do a substitution to get finger 5 over the next note, the D in measure 21. But regardless of the passage, just avoid using the side of finger 5 when it's in use for a long note. One of the spots in this piece that gave me a little bit of extra grief, and I'm still got my iron and the ironing board out trying to get rid of the crinkles, and that would be the left hand measure 21. I've had to tweak this fingering a few times. 21, left hand. I'm doing 5, 2, 3, 2, 5. Now there's a weird thing. 2, 5. And I was a little bit shocked with myself. I was like, are you sure you want to do that, Penny? Because like 2 to 5, right? And then the third and fourth fingers, they're up there in La La Land, which is another point worth mentioning too. Because we want to use the whole hand and all of the fingers, especially the long, strong fingers, and the hand is always in motion, we have to, sometimes it happens that, let's say if we got 2 fingers next to each other playing close together, like 2 and 4, that leaves the third finger, like, what does it do, right? Hey, man, where do I go? Right? And I've seen students with very awkward looking fingers that it's like the third wheel, maybe there's a date or something and a third person comes along, or a party, and you just feel like the wallflower. You don't fit in. You don't know where to stand or what to do. Oh, I'll just go to the kitchen and like help with serving because I'm awkward in the party. That's what some of the fingers on the hand are like when the other fingers adjacent to that finger are doing activity and busy work. And so you just got to get comfortable with letting the finger just shadow those those other notes. So if I'm playing something with 2 and 4, you don't need to keep the third finger way out here. It can still be touching those other 2 fingers. They're all staying very close together. But the passage that where I'm dealing with this kind of thing, as I say, is 21 in the left hand. I got 2, 5 there on the second beat for the B flat and the A natural. 2, 5. That's quite, those are quite close together. And the third and fourth fingers are like, what? But I'm just angling them. The third finger is a little bit over top the fourth, and they're kind of pointed off to the left a little bit. So 2, 5, 3, 4, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 5, 4, 1, 2, 1, 5. Sorry. So again, from 21, after the tied note, 5, 2, 3, 2, 5, 3, 4, 2, 5, 3, 4. That, as I've been working out my fingering, I've been realizing, and also in trying to explain it too, I've realized that sometimes my fingering at a slow tempo is a little bit different from when I'm playing fast. And I never realized this until I started trying to notate my fingering, because I don't do that for myself. It paralyzes me to have the finger numbers on my music as I'm reading it. Here and there I'll write it in, but for every note, goodness, no. But I write it out from time to time to share with you. And the only way I can figure out those numbers is to go really slowly and watch my hand. And it's particularly hard when I'm trying to do it for my left hand, because I'm left-handed, I should learn to be ambidextrous. Then I could write those fingerings in my right as I'm playing them in the left. But I'll play it slowly and write it down and think, okay, that's what I'm using. And then when I play it up to speed, I was like, wait, that's not what I'm using. But both feel good. And so I think maybe that's just something that comes with many years of playing. But this strange 2-5 on the B flat to A natural in the left hand at 21 was just something that enabled me to position my hand for the notes to come. And considering, as I said earlier, that I wasn't pleased so much with my last performance of this piece, and I've been experimenting with some different articulation, this was the fingering that worked for me. And you have to allow yourself to experiment with fingering. So that was my one really danger spot here. that is basically it. I mean, you can do some of the usual tips that I always do when I'm practicing, and that is a lot of forte staccato practice. Again, with an accent on the front of each beat. Because this piece, as we said, is very scalar. Right? It's C minor scale all over the place with those wide intervals. I'm finding that for the wide intervals, I have to allow for a little bit more release of my arm to help with transportation. Those, like the seventh, as we cross the bar line between bar 1 and 2. Many places throughout the piece. Let's look a little bit later on, like in the left hand, measure 11 when it starts the second canon. It's a descending minor sixth. I'm doing a lot more of this, opening my arm a little bit and then rotating with my hand and wrist to the other side to help with transportation. And the fingering choices that I've come up with, which you will have seen by now on the screen, I use fingering that enables me to avoid those bumps that we heard earlier, that allows me constant use of the hand, of the entire hand, and that allows me to prepare for what's to come. This piece is very notey. So when you've got notey pieces like this, keep your fingers nice and curved, no flat fingers. Finger substitutions can be handy. I don't do a whole lot of them in this piece. I have a few. The left hand, measure 15 here. So on the B flat, which is tied at the end of beat 1 into beat 2, I'm playing 4 and then 1, substituting to 2. And that happens in the blink of an eye. Finger substitutions. I'm doing them a lot in Bach, and they happen like instinctively and intuitively and very, very quickly. And they allow me, it's just this. You take the note with one finger and you don't let it up before you substitute to another finger. Finger substitutions are essential in Bach. They're very helpful because I got it written down here so I don't make up my words and stutter here. They help us to minimize bumps. They also help to prepare the hand for what's to come, and they help to minimize the distance needed to be traveled. All of which gives us a lovely package with a bow tie of clarity. And that is what I strive for in my playing. Clear playing. I want you to hear everything that's going on. This was a motto that was like banged into my head by Constance Keene. Not literally banged, but like she really emphasized that. I have my lesson notes from her when I studied with her at Manhattan School of Music, and she was always talking about, you need more clarity in your playing. More clarity. We need to hear everything. Doesn't mean that everything is of equal importance and that some notes don't need to be brought out more or less than others, but we still got to hear everything. That's very hard to do. That's a lot of responsibility. And also that has been my motto since, and also to communicate through the sound. I want to delight a listener. I want to please them. I want to give them an experience. So hopefully these tips, in conjunction with the previous tutorial I did on this piece, will be some more tools for your toolbox as you practice. And I sincerely hope that even if you're not working on this piece, that you will find a way to use these techniques in whatever you're playing by Bach, or perhaps even by other composers, because these are universal tips and tricks, finger substitutions, feeling the strong part of the beat, breathing, energizing rests, all of these things. So I'm going to end it there. Leave me your comments if you've got further suggestions or thoughts on this piece. It's a doozy of a piece. It's tricky. But I got to wrap it up. So thank you for watching. Happy practicing. Stay well, stay safe, and we'll see you again soon for more explorations of Bach's music. Take care. Bye-bye.